The gunshot that shattered the evening stillness wasn't meant for her. But Laura Owens ran anyway, her feet pounding against the forest floor as branches tore at her dress and scratched her arms. She had been gathering herbs near the creek when the men rode into the clearing, their voices rough with whiskey and violence, and she had seen enough in her 22 years living in Val Verde, Texas, to know when to hide and when to flee. The year was 1876, and the territory was still wild enough that a woman alone in the woods after dark was asking for trouble, but she had promised Mrs. Henderson she would bring feverfew for her sick child, and Laura Owens had never been one to break a promise, even when it meant putting herself in danger. The hem of her blue calico dress caught on a thorny mesquite branch and she heard the fabric rip, felt the evening air suddenly cold against her legs where the skirt had torn away. She kept running, her lungs burning, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Behind her, the voices grew louder, angrier, and she realized with growing horror that they had spotted her. She was not supposed to be there. She had seen their faces. She had witnessed whatever dark business they were conducting in those woods, and men like that did not leave witnesses. Laura crashed through another thicket, her dress tearing further, the bodice nearly coming apart at the seams. Her long brown hair had come loose from its pins and streamed behind her like a flag. She did not know these woods as well as she should have, had always stayed close to the paths, and now she was lost, disoriented, running blind through the deepening twilight. A root caught her foot and she stumbled, catching herself against a cottonwood tree, gasping for breath. The voices were closer now. She could hear the snap of branches, the heavy footfalls of men who were not used to being defied. She ran again, her throat raw, her legs trembling. The forest opened suddenly into a small clearing, and there, beside a campfire that burned low and steady, a man stood up from where he had been tending his horse. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty brown trousers and a dark blue shirt that had seen better days. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing brown hair and a face that was weathered but kind, with dark eyes that took in her torn dress, her wild expression, her desperate flight, all in an instant. "Please," Laura gasped, stumbling toward him. "Please help me." The cowboy stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip, his eyes scanning the woods behind her. He could hear the men coming, could hear their curses and threats carrying through the trees. Without a word, he unbuttoned his shirt, shrugging out of it quickly, revealing a worn undershirt beneath. He wrapped the blue shirt around her shoulders, pulling it closed over her torn dress, his movements quick and efficient. "Get behind my horse," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that somehow steadied her racing heart. "Stay down." Laura obeyed, crouching behind the big bay gelding, her fingers clutching the cowboy's shirt around her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body, smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something clean she could not name. She watched as he stood by the fire, his posture deceptively relaxed, his hand resting casually near his gun. 3 men burst into the clearing, their faces flushed, their eyes mean. The one in front was heavy-set, with a thick black beard and a scar running down his left cheek. The other 2 flanked him, younger, meaner, with the look of men who enjoyed hurting things. "You see a woman come through here?" the bearded man demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. The cowboy looked at them with mild interest, as if they had asked him about the weather. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. "Can I help you with something? I asked you a question," the bearded man growled, taking a step forward. "A woman, brown hair, blue dress. She come through here." The cowboy shook his head slowly. "Have not seen anyone," he said. "Been here an hour or so, just me and my horse. You fellows lose someone." The bearded man's eyes narrowed, scanning the camp. Laura held her breath, pressing herself closer to the horse's warm flank. The animal shifted slightly, sensing her fear but did not give her away. "She saw something she should not have seen," one of the younger men said. "We need to find her." "Well, she did not come this way," the cowboy said, his voice still calm, still easy. "Maybe she headed east toward the river. That is where I would go if I was running scared." The bearded man stared at him for a long moment, weighing the truth of his words. Laura could see the calculation in his eyes, the violence simmering just beneath the surface. Her hand tightened on the cowboy's shirt, her knuckles white. "You staying here tonight?" the bearded man asked. "That is the plan," the cowboy said. "Unless you have some objection." The bearded man spat into the dirt. "You did not see nothing, you hear me? Whatever you think you might have heard or seen tonight, you keep it to yourself." "I am just a cowboy passing through," the man said. "I do not involve myself in other folks' business." The three men exchanged glances, then turned and headed back into the woods, their footsteps fading gradually into the distance. The cowboy did not move, did not relax his stance, until the sounds had disappeared completely and the forest had returned to its natural quiet. Only then did he turn to where Laura crouched behind his horse. "They are gone," he said quietly. "You can come out now." Laura stood on shaking legs, the cowboy's shirt still wrapped around her shoulders. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt the full weight of her fear, felt her body begin to tremble uncontrollably. The cowboy took a step toward her, his expression concerned. "You are safe," he said. "They are not coming back tonight." "How do you know?" Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because they believed me about the river," he said. "They will spend the next few hours searching the eastern woods. By the time they realize I sent them the wrong way, it will be too dark to track anyone." He paused, studying her face. "You want to tell me what you saw that has them so riled up?" Laura shook her head, then nodded, then shook her head again. "I do not know," she admitted. "I was gathering herbs by the creek and I heard riders coming. I hid behind some rocks. They were talking about a shipment, about someone named Crawford, about money that was supposed to be delivered to the territorial judge. Then one of them saw movement, fired a shot, and I ran." The cowboy's expression darkened. "You witnessed them planning to intercept a government payment," he said. "That would be enough to get you killed, yes." "I did not mean to see anything," Laura said, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to help a sick child." "I believe you," the cowboy said gently. He gestured to the fire. "Sit down before you fall down. You look like you are about to collapse." Laura sank down onto a log near the fire, her legs finally giving out. The cowboy disappeared for a moment, returning with a canteen. He handed it to her, and she drank gratefully, the water cool and clean. When she had finished, she looked up at him properly for the first time. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and eyes that were dark brown and surprisingly gentle. There was a scar along his right temple, faded white with age, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. He wore his gun like it was part of him, natural and easy, but there was nothing threatening in his manner. "Thank you," Laura said quietly. "You saved my life." "Maybe," the cowboy said, "maybe they would have given up and let you go." "No," Laura said with certainty. "They would have killed me, I saw it in their eyes." The cowboy nodded slowly. "Probably," he agreed. "Men like that do not take chances." He settled down across from her, adding a piece of wood to the fire. "I am Kieran Malloy. I have been working a ranch up near Fort Worth, heading south to find work." "Laura Owens," she said. "I live in Val Verde, about 3 miles from here. I teach at the schoolhouse." "A school teacher," Kieran said, and there was something in his voice that might have been approval. "That is good work." It is the only work I am qualified for, Laura said. My parents died of fever when I was 17. My uncle paid for me to attend normal school in San Antonio, and I have been teaching ever since. She looked down at her torn dress, at the scratches on her arms, and felt suddenly embarrassed. I must look terrible. You look like someone who ran for her life, Kieran said matter-of-factly. Nothing shameful in that. He paused. You cannot go back to Val Verde tonight. Those men might be watching the roads, waiting to see if you turn up. Laura felt a chill run through her. I have to go back, she said. Mrs. Henderson needs the feverfew for her daughter, and I have school tomorrow. The children will be waiting. The children can wait one day, Kieran said firmly. Your life is worth more than a day of lessons. He met her eyes across the fire. You can stay here tonight. I will keep watch. In the morning, I will take you back to town, and we will figure out what to do about those men. I cannot stay here with you, Laura protested. It would not be proper. If anyone found out, my reputation would be ruined. I would lose my position at the school. If anyone finds out, I will tell them I was protecting a woman in danger, Kieran said. Which is the truth. And I will keep my distance, Miss Owens. You have my word as a gentleman. Laura looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. She barely knew this man, but he had already proven himself willing to risk his life for her. He had lied to dangerous men, had given her his shirt, was now offering her protection without asking for anything in return. In her experience, men like that were rare. All right, she said quietly. Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Kieran, he said. No need for formality when we are camping in the woods. Kieran, Laura repeated, and the name felt comfortable on her tongue. You can call me Laura. He smiled then, a slow smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and open. Laura, he said. That is a pretty name. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Laura pulled Kieran's shirt tighter around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth as the night air grew cooler. She could feel exhaustion pulling at her, the adrenaline from her flight finally wearing off, leaving her drained and shaky. You should try to sleep, Kieran said. I will keep the fire going, make sure no one comes near the camp. What about you? Laura asked. Do you not need to sleep? I will rest later, Kieran said. I've gone longer without sleep before. He saw her doubtful expression and added, I was a scout for the army for 2 years, back during the troubles with the Comanche. I learned how to sleep light and stay alert. That must have been dangerous work, Laura said. It was, Kieran agreed, but it taught me things. How to read the land, how to tell when trouble is coming, how to survive. He poked at the fire with a stick. I left when my enlistment was up. I had seen enough fighting. Laura wanted to ask more, wanted to know what he had seen, what had made him walk away from that life, but she could see the shadows in his eyes and decided not to press. Instead, she said, I should have been more careful. I should not have stayed out so late. You were trying to help a sick child, Kieran said. That is nothing to be ashamed of. But now I have put you in danger too, Laura said. Those men saw you. They will remember your face. I can take care of myself, Kieran said. And besides, I was not planning on staying in this area long anyway. Once I get you safely back to town, I will move on. Something about those words made Laura's chest tighten in a way she did not expect. She had only just met this man, but the thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, felt wrong somehow. She pushed the feeling away, told herself she was just being foolish, that it was the fear and exhaustion making her emotional. Where will you go? She asked. Kieran shrugged. South, maybe. I heard there is work on some of the ranches near the border, or west toward New Mexico territory. I have never been that way before. You do not have a home? Laura asked. Not really, Kieran said. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, but my parents sold it when I was 15. They wanted to move to California, but my mother got sick on the trail and died somewhere in Kansas. My father turned back, but he was never the same after that. He drank himself to death within a year. He said it flatly, without emotion, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. I have been on my own since I was 16. That was 12 years ago. I am sorry, Laura said softly. That must have been hard. It was what it was, Kieran said. I survived. That is more than some people can say. He looked at her across the fire. What about you? You said your parents died. Do you have other family? An uncle in San Antonio, Laura said. But we are not close. He paid for my education because it was his duty, not because he cared. I have not seen him in 3 years. She hesitated, then added, I have friends in Val Verde. The other teachers, some of the families whose children I teach. Mrs. Henderson is kind to me, but mostly I am alone. Alone is not so bad, Kieran said. You learn to rely on yourself. Yes, Laura agreed, but sometimes it would be nice to have someone to rely on besides yourself. Their eyes met across the fire and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding that they were both solitary souls, both used to standing on their own, both secretly longing for connection. Kieran looked away first, clearing his throat. You should really try to sleep, he said again. Dawn will come early. Laura nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. She lay down on the ground near the fire, using her arm as a pillow, Kieran's shirt still wrapped around her. The earth was hard beneath her, and she knew she should be uncomfortable, should be afraid, but somehow she felt safer than she had in a long time. She could see Kieran sitting by the fire, his profile strong against the flames, and she let her eyes drift closed. She woke once during the night, disoriented, her heart racing from some dream she could not remember. Kieran was still there, still keeping watch, and when he saw her stir, he spoke quietly into the darkness. You are safe, he said. Go back to sleep. And she did, soothed by his presence, by the steadiness in his voice. When she woke again, it was to the smell of coffee and the pale light of dawn filtering through the trees. Kieran was crouched by the fire, tending a small pot that hung over the flames. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her sit up. Morning, he said. Coffee is almost ready. Laura sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair, trying to make herself presentable. Her dress was still torn, still covered in dirt and leaves, and she felt a flush of embarrassment. In the daylight, the reality of her situation seemed more stark. She had spent the night in the woods with a man she barely knew. If anyone found out, she would be ruined. What are you thinking? Kieran asked, watching her face. That I am going to have a hard time explaining this, Laura admitted. Then we do not explain it, Kieran said. I will take you back to town, drop you off somewhere quiet where you can slip in without being seen. You go home, change your dress, and show up at the schoolhouse like nothing happened. And what about those men? Laura asked. What if they are watching? Then we will deal with them, Kieran said. But first we get you home safe. He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Laura wrapped her hands around the warm tin cup, grateful for the heat. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the last cobwebs of sleep. Thank you, she said, for everything. I do not know what would have happened if I had not stumbled into your camp. You would have found another way, Kieran said. You seem like the resourceful type. I am a school teacher, Laura said with a slight smile. I am used to dealing with difficult situations. I imagine 30 children in one room would count as a difficult situation, Kieran agreed. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, and then Kieran saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. He helped Laura up into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Laura stiffened at first, unused to being so close to a man, but Kieran's touch was respectful, his presence reassuring rather than threatening. "Which way?" he asked. "South," Laura said. "Follow the creek for about a mile, then there is a trail that leads into town." They rode through the morning woods, the sun rising higher, turning the leaves gold and green. Birds sang in the branches overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a dove called mournfully. Laura could feel the warmth of Kieran's body against her back, could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, and she found herself thinking that she could ride like this forever, safe in the circle of his arms. But all too soon, the woods began to thin, and she could see the buildings of Val Verde ahead, could smell wood smoke and hear the distant sounds of the town waking up. Kieran pulled the horse to a stop at the edge of the tree line. "You should walk from here," he said. "Less likely someone will see you arriving with a stranger." Laura nodded, but she did not move immediately. Instead, she turned to look at him, at his tired face, his kind eyes. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. Kieran looked at her for a long moment. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I was planning to move on today." "Oh," Laura said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, you have your own life, your own plans." But Kieran added slowly, "I could stay a day or two." "Make sure those men are not going to cause you any more trouble." Laura's heart lifted. "You would do that." "I would," Kieran said. "Someone has to make sure you get to the schoolhouse safely." Laura smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Then I will see you later." "You will," Kieran promised. He slid down from the horse, then helped her down, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood very close, and Laura could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could see the slight stubble on his jaw. She had the sudden, inexplicable urge to reach up and touch his face, to feel if his skin was as warm as she imagined. Instead, she stepped back, pulling his shirt from her shoulders and holding it out to him. "Your shirt," she said. "Thank you for letting me borrow it." Kieran took the shirt, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Keep it safe for me," he said. "I will come by later to collect it." "Where will you be?" Laura asked. "I will find the sheriff," Kieran said. "Tell him what happened, see if he knows anything about those men." Laura felt a flutter of anxiety. "Do you think that is wise? What if the sheriff is involved?" "Then I will know to be careful," Kieran said. "But if he is honest, he needs to know there are men planning to rob a government shipment." Laura nodded reluctantly. "The schoolhouse is on Elm Street," she said. "The white building with the bell tower. I will be there until 3 o'clock. "I will find you," Kieran said. He mounted his horse again, looking down at her. "Be careful, Laura." "You too," she said softly. She watched him ride away, disappearing into the trees, and then she turned and hurried toward town, clutching the borrowed shirt to her chest. She felt strange, unmoored, as if something fundamental had shifted in her life during the long night. She had met a man who had risked everything to protect her, and now she could not stop thinking about him, could not stop remembering the feel of his arms around her, the warmth of his voice in the darkness. Laura slipped through the back streets of Val Verde, grateful that it was still early enough that most people were inside having breakfast. She reached her small house, a modest 2-room cottage on the edge of town, without being seen. Inside, she quickly changed out of her torn dress, washing the scratches on her arms and legs, pinning her hair back into a respectable bun. She looked at herself in the small mirror over her wash basin and saw that her face was different somehow, her eyes brighter, her cheeks flushed. She looked like a woman with a secret. She folded Kieran's shirt carefully and placed it in her wardrobe, running her fingers over the fabric one last time before closing the door. Then she gathered her teaching materials, took a deep breath, and headed to the schoolhouse. The children were already waiting when she arrived. A dozen boys and girls ranging from 6 to 14, all chattering and laughing as they played in the yard. They quieted when they saw her, filing into the schoolroom with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Laura went through the motions of the day, teaching arithmetic and reading, hearing recitations, but her mind kept wandering to Kieran, wondering where he was, what he was learning. At noon, she dismissed the children for lunch, and she was standing at the window watching them play when she heard footsteps on the wooden porch. Her heart jumped, hoping it was Kieran, but instead Sheriff Wade Holloway pushed open the door, his expression serious. Wade Holloway was a big man, well into his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. He had been sheriff of Val Verde for 10 years, and most people considered him fair and honest. Laura had always respected him, but now, seeing him standing in her schoolroom, she felt a spike of fear. Had Kieran been wrong to trust him, Miss Owens, the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat. I hope I am not interrupting. Not at all, Sheriff, Laura said, keeping her voice steady. The children are at lunch. What can I do for you? I had a visit this morning from a cowboy named Kieran Malloy, the sheriff said, watching her face carefully. He told me a very interesting story about some men planning to rob a government shipment. He also said you witnessed these men last night out by Willow Creek. Laura felt her mouth go dry. That is true, she said. I was gathering herbs when I overheard them talking. They saw me and gave chase. Mr. Malloy helped me. That is what he said, the sheriff agreed. He also said you spent the night at his camp. Laura felt her face flush. He kept watch all night, she said firmly. He was a perfect gentleman. He saved my life, Sheriff. I am not questioning his character, the sheriff said gently, or yours. I am just trying to understand what happened. He pulled out a small notebook. Can you describe the men you saw? Laura described them as best she could, the bearded man with the scar, the two younger men, the conversation she had overheard. The sheriff listened intently, making notes. That would be Cal Brennan and his boys, the sheriff said grimly. They have been causing trouble in the territory for years. Rustling, robbery, the occasional murder. I have been trying to catch them red-handed for a long time. He looked at Laura. You are sure they said the name Crawford? Yes, Laura said. They said Crawford was supposed to deliver the money to the territorial judge. Henry Crawford is the territorial treasurer, the sheriff said. He is supposed to be transporting payment for the new courthouse next week. If Brennan knows about it, we have a serious problem. He closed his notebook. I am going to need you to testify, Miss Owens. If we can catch Brennan in the act, your testimony about what you overheard will help convict him. Testify, Laura said, her stomach sinking. You mean in court? Eventually, yes, the sheriff said. But first, we need to catch him. Sheriff, those men wanted to kill me, Laura said quietly. If they find out I am testifying, they will come after me. Which is why I am going to make sure you are protected, the sheriff said. I will put a deputy outside your house at night, and during the day, you will stay in public places where they would not dare try anything. He paused. Mr. Malloy also offered to help keep an eye on you. He seems like a capable man. Laura felt her cheeks warm again. He is, she said, very capable. The sheriff's eyes crinkled slightly, and she suspected he was smiling beneath his thick mustache. I see, he said. Well, I will leave you to your teaching, Miss Owens, but I want you to be careful. Stay in town, do not go anywhere alone, and if you see Brennan or his men, you come find me immediately. I will, Laura promised. The sheriff left, and Laura sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. She was going to have to testify against dangerous criminals. The thought terrified her, but she knew it was the right thing to do. If Cal Brennan and his men were planning to rob the territorial treasurer, they needed to be stopped. The afternoon passed slowly, and when 3 o'clock finally came and the last child had been dismissed, Laura found herself pacing the empty schoolroom, watching the street outside. She told herself she was not waiting for Kieran, that she was just being cautious, but she knew it was a lie. She wanted to see him again. She needed to know he was all right. The sun was beginning to slant toward the west when she finally saw him, riding down Elm Street on his bay gelding. He tied the horse to the hitching post outside the schoolhouse and came up the steps, knocking politely on the open door. "Is it safe to come in?" he asked, a slight smile on his face. "Yes," Laura said, her heart lifting at the sight of him. "Please come in." Kieran entered the schoolroom, looking around with interest at the rows of desks, the blackboard with its chalked lessons, the shelves of books along one wall. "This is nice," he said. "Looks like a good place to learn." "I like to think so," Laura said. "Did you speak with the sheriff?" "I did," Kieran said. "He seems like a good man, honest. He is taking the threat seriously." "He came by here earlier," Laura said. "He wants me to testify against those men." "I know," Kieran said. "He told me. He also said he would make sure you are protected." "He mentioned that you offered to help with that," Laura said, looking at him carefully. Kieran met her eyes. "I did," he said, "if you are comfortable with that arrangement." "Why would you do that?" Laura asked. "You do not owe me anything. You already saved my life." "You could just move on like you planned." Kieran was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was serious. "I could," he said, "but I do not want to, not until I know you are safe." "Why?" Laura asked again, more softly this time. Kieran looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Because I have spent 12 years drifting from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to matter," he said. "And for the first time in all those years, I met someone I do not want to leave." He paused. "Is that honest enough for you?" Laura felt her heart begin to race. "Yes," she whispered. "That is honest enough." They stood looking at each other across the schoolroom, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and Laura felt something click into place inside her chest. Some piece she had not even known was missing. She had spent 5 years alone, teaching her students, keeping herself at a distance from everyone in the town, protecting herself from hurt. But looking at Kieran now, at his open, honest face, she felt those walls beginning to crumble. "I do not want you to leave either," she said quietly. Kieran smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Then I will stay," he said, "at least until this business with Brennan is settled." "And after that?" Laura asked. "After that," Kieran said slowly, "maybe we will see where things go." Laura found herself smiling back at him. "I would like that," she said. "Good," Kieran said. He looked around the schoolroom again. "So is this where you spend all your time?" "Most of it," Laura admitted. "Teaching, preparing lessons, grading papers. It does not leave much time for anything else." "That sounds lonely," Kieran observed. "It is," Laura said, "but it is also safe. If you do not let anyone get close, they cannot hurt you." "That is true," Kieran said, "but they also cannot make you happy." Laura looked at him, surprised by his insight. "Is that why you keep moving?" she asked. "To keep from getting hurt?" "Maybe," Kieran admitted. "Or maybe I just never found a reason to stay." He crossed the room to stand closer to her. "Until now." Laura felt her breath catch again. He was close enough that she could see the tired lines around his eyes, could see the sincerity written plain on his face. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingertips. "You need to rest," she said softly. "You have been awake for more than a day." "I will rest," Kieran promised. "But first, I need to make sure you get home safely." "The sheriff said he would have a deputy watching your house, but I want to see you there myself." "You do not have to do that," Laura said. "I know," Kieran said, "but I am going to anyway." They walked together through the streets of Val Verde, Kieran leading his horse, Laura carrying her schoolbooks. People stared at them as they passed, and Laura could see the questions in their eyes, could almost hear the gossip starting. She should have been worried about her reputation, should have been concerned about what people would say, but with Kieran beside her, she found that she did not care. Let them talk. For the first time in years, she felt alive, felt like something good was finally happening to her. When they reached her little cottage, a young deputy was already stationed outside, sitting on a chair with his rifle across his knees. He stood when he saw them approaching. "Miss Owens," he said, nodding politely. "Sheriff Holloway sent me to keep watch." "Thank you, deputy," Laura said. She turned to Kieran. "Would you like to come in? I could make some coffee, maybe find you something to eat." Kieran hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and exhaustion. Finally, he nodded. "Just for a little while," he said. "Then I need to find somewhere to stable my horse and get some sleep myself." Inside the cottage, Laura busied herself making coffee and heating up some leftover stew from the night before. The cottage was small but tidy, with a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area and a bedroom off to one side. It was not much, but it was hers, and she had worked hard to make it comfortable. Kieran sat at her small table, looking around with interest. "This is nice," he said. "Cozy." "It is small," Laura said, "but it is enough for me." "Small is not a bad thing," Kieran said. "Easier to keep warm in the winter." They ate the stew in comfortable silence, and Laura found herself watching him, memorizing the way he moved, the way he held his spoon, the way his eyes crinkled when he was thinking. She barely knew this man, had only met him the night before, but she felt like she had known him much longer. There was something familiar about him, something that felt like coming home. When they had finished eating, Kieran stood reluctantly. "I should go," he said. "Let you get some rest." "Where will you stay?" Laura asked. "The sheriff said there is a boarding house on Main Street," Kieran said. "I will try there. Mrs. Patterson's place," Laura said. "She is a good woman. She will treat you well." She hesitated, then added, "Will I see you tomorrow?" "You will see me every day until this is over," Kieran promised. "I will walk you to school in the morning, and I will be there when you finish in the afternoon." "You do not have to do that," Laura said, but she was smiling. "I know," Kieran said, "but I want to." He left then, and Laura stood at her window, watching him ride away down the street. The deputy outside gave her a friendly nod, and she waved back, then closed the curtains. She prepared for bed mechanically, her mind full of Kieran, of the way he had looked at her, of the words he had spoken in the schoolroom. She climbed into bed and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt hope stirring in her chest. The next week passed in a strange, suspended way. Every morning, Kieran appeared at her cottage just after dawn, and they would walk together to the schoolhouse, talking quietly about their lives, their dreams, their pasts. Laura learned that Kieran loved horses, that he had once wanted to own a ranch, that he read books whenever he could get his hands on them. Kieran learned that Laura had always wanted to travel, that she loved thunderstorms, that she secretly wrote poetry in the evenings when she was alone. Every afternoon, he would be waiting when school let out, and they would walk back together, sometimes stopping at the general store or the bakery, sometimes just wandering through the quiet streets of Val Verde. People stopped staring after a few days, accepted that the tall cowboy was courting the schoolteacher, and Laura overheard Mrs. Patterson telling someone that it was about time Miss Owens found herself a good man. But beneath the pleasant routine, there was tension. Sheriff Holloway was preparing a trap for Cal Brennan and his gang, and Laura knew that when it happened, she would have to testify. The thought kept her awake at night, made her jump at sudden noises during the day. Kieran sensed her fear, and he was always there, steady and reassuring, reminding her that she was not alone. On the 8th day after they met, the sheriff came to the schoolhouse just as Laura was dismissing the children. Kieran was already there, leaning against the hitching post outside, and they both straightened when they saw the serious expression on the sheriff's face. "It is happening tomorrow," Sheriff Holloway said without preamble. "Crawford is transporting the money from Austin. I got word that Brennan and his boys are planning to hit him about 10 miles south of town, near the old Watson Ranch." "What do you need from us?" Kieran asked. "I need Miss Owens to stay somewhere safe," the sheriff said. "Somewhere Brennan cannot get to her if things go wrong. And I could use an extra gun if you are willing, Mr. Malloy. I am deputizing a dozen men, but we are still outnumbered." Kieran glanced at Laura. "I will help," he said, "but only if Laura is somewhere I know she is protected." "I was thinking she could stay at the hotel," the sheriff said. "Top floor, with a guard at the door and another at the bottom of the stairs. Brennan would have to fight through half the town to get to her there." "I do not like this," Laura said quietly. "You are all putting yourselves in danger because of me." "We are putting ourselves in danger because Brennan is a criminal," the sheriff corrected. "You just happen to witness his plans. But that testimony is important, Miss Owens. With you confirming what he said about Crawford and the money, we can put him away for a long time." Laura looked at Kieran, at his calm, serious face. "Will you be careful?" she asked. "I will," Kieran promised. "I have every reason to come back safely." That night, Kieran walked Laura to the hotel where the sheriff had already arranged a room for her. They stood in the hotel lobby, neither one wanting to say goodbye. "I wish I could come with you," Laura said. "I wish I could help." "You are helping," Kieran said, "by being safe, by giving us one less thing to worry about." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "I will come back to you, Laura, I promise." "You cannot promise that," Laura said, her voice breaking slightly. "Anything could happen." "Then let me promise this," Kieran said, stepping closer. "I will do everything in my power to come back to you, because I have something to say and I want to say it in person." "What do you need to say?" Laura asked, looking up at him. Kieran smiled. "That I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "And I think you might be falling in love with me too." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. "I am," she whispered. "I did not mean to, it happened so fast, but I am." Kieran bent his head and kissed her then, a soft, gentle kiss that tasted of promises and hope. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Then I will definitely come back," he said, "because we have a lot more of that to look forward to." He left then, and Laura watched from her hotel room window as he walked away into the night. She did not sleep at all, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling into darkness, praying that morning would come and bring Kieran back to her safely. Dawn broke gray and overcast, with clouds rolling in from the west. Laura stood at her window, watching the main street slowly come to life. She saw the sheriff and his deputies gathering in front of the jail, saw them checking their weapons, saw Kieran among them, taller than most, his movements efficient and calm. Then they mounted their horses and rode south out of town, and Laura was left alone with her fear. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The hotel proprietor brought her breakfast, but Laura could barely eat. She paced her room, sat by the window, paced again. The guard outside her door changed at noon, and the new man told her there had been no news yet. Laura thanked him and went back to her pacing. It was mid-afternoon when she heard the commotion in the street below. She rushed to the window and saw riders coming into town, recognized the sheriff in the lead. Behind him came a wagon with 3 men in it, their hands bound. Cal Brennan and his gang, captured at last. But where was Kieran? Laura felt her heart stop, felt cold fear wash over her. She could not see him among the riders. Had something happened? Was he hurt? Was he? And then she saw him, riding at the back of the group, his hat pushed back, his face dusty but unharmed. He looked up at her window as if he had known exactly where she would be, and he smiled, that slow, wonderful smile that made her heart sing. Laura did not remember running down the stairs, did not remember pushing past the guard, did not remember anything until she was in the street, running toward him. Kieran dismounted in one smooth motion and caught her as she flung herself into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "You are safe," she said over and over, her face pressed against his shoulder. "You are safe." "I told you I would come back," Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. "I always keep my promises." Around them, people were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion, but Laura did not care. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, to assure herself that he was truly unharmed. "What happened?" she asked. "Everything went according to plan," Kieran said. "We ambushed them when they tried to ambush Crawford. There was some shooting, but nobody on our side was hurt. Brennan and his boys gave up when they realized they were surrounded." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "It is over, Laura. You are safe now." Laura felt tears spill over, tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "I thought something had happened to you." "I am fine," Kieran assured her. "I am right here." The sheriff came over, looking pleased despite his obvious exhaustion. "Good work today, Malloy," he said. "I could use a man like you on a permanent basis if you are interested in staying around Val Verde." Kieran looked down at Laura, still held in his arms, and then back at the sheriff. "I might be interested," he said, "depending on what else might keep me here." "I think you have already found what might keep you here," the sheriff said with a knowing smile. He tipped his hat to Laura. "Miss Owens, I will need you to come by the jail tomorrow to give your formal statement. But for now, why do not you two go celebrate? You have earned it." They walked back to Laura's cottage, Kieran leading his horse, his other arm around Laura's shoulders. The deputy who had been guarding her house was gone, no longer needed, and the cottage felt wonderfully quiet and private after the chaos of the street. Inside, Laura made coffee with trembling hands, still not quite believing that it was truly over, that the danger had passed. Kieran sat at her table and watched her, his dark eyes soft. "You are shaking," he observed. "I know," Laura said. "I cannot seem to stop." Kieran stood and came to her, taking the coffee pot gently from her hands and setting it aside. Then he pulled her into his arms again, holding her close, and Laura felt the tension finally begin to drain out of her body. "It is over," he said again, his voice low and soothing. "You are safe." "I am safe. Everything is going to be all right." Laura tilted her head back to look at him. "Is it?" she asked. "What happens now?" "Now," Kieran said slowly, "I ask the sheriff about that deputy position. I find somewhere to live in town. I court you properly the way you deserve to be courted." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "If that is what you want." "That is what I want," Laura said without hesitation. "More than anything." "Even though you have only known me for a week?" Kieran asked. "Even though," Laura confirmed. "Sometimes you just know, Kieran. Sometimes it does not take years to recognize something real." Kieran smiled and bent his head to kiss her, a longer, deeper kiss than the one they had shared the night before. Laura wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her fear and relief and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," Kieran said, the words coming easily now. "I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but I love you, Laura Owens." "I love you too," Laura said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, Kieran Malloy." They stood there in her small kitchen, holding each other as the afternoon light faded into evening, and Laura thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. A week ago, she had been alone, had believed she would always be alone. And now here she was, in the arms of a man who had risked everything to protect her, who had stayed when he could have left, who loved her the way she had always dreamed of being loved. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Kieran accepted the sheriff's offer and became a deputy, and he proved to be good at the work, fair and level-headed and respected by the townspeople. He rented a small house on the edge of town, not far from Laura's cottage, and they spent their evenings together, talking and laughing and planning their future. In November, on a crisp autumn day with leaves blowing down the streets of Val Verde, Kieran asked Laura to marry him. They were sitting on the steps of the schoolhouse, watching the sun set, and he turned to her with that serious expression she had come to love. "I know we have not been courting for very long," he said, "but I do not want to wait any longer. Will you marry me, Laura?" Laura did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in December, in the small church on the edge of town with half of Val Verde in attendance. Laura wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that Kieran had picked for her that morning. Kieran wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with happiness as he watched her walk down the aisle. Sheriff Holloway stood up with Kieran, and Mrs. Henderson stood up with Laura, and the preacher read the vows that joined them together as husband and wife. When Kieran kissed her, sealing their marriage, Laura felt a joy so complete that she thought her heart might burst with it. They moved into Kieran's house, which became their house, and Laura continued teaching while Kieran worked as a deputy. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, filled with small moments of happiness. Cooking dinner together in the evenings, reading by lamplight on cold winter nights, waking up beside each other every morning. Sunday afternoons spent visiting friends or taking long walks through the countryside. In the spring of 1877, Laura discovered she was pregnant. She told Kieran one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and he pulled her into his arms with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Laura asked, though she could see the answer written plain on his face. "I am more than happy," Kieran said. "I am blessed. I have you, and now we are going to have a child. I never thought I would have this, Laura. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Laura said firmly. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." Their son was born in October, a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's brown eyes. They named him Thomas William Malloy, after both their fathers, and Kieran held him with such tenderness that Laura fell in love with her husband all over again. Being parents was harder than either of them had expected, but it was also more wonderful. Laura took time off from teaching to care for their son, and Kieran would come home from his shifts to find her rocking Thomas by the fire, singing softly. He would take the baby from her arms and walk the floor with him, letting Laura rest, and in those moments, Laura would think about how far they had both come, how much their lives had changed from that night in the forest when she had stumbled into his camp, afraid and alone. Thomas grew into a sturdy, happy child, and 2 years after he was born, Laura gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Sarah Rose. And 2 years after that, another son, David James. Their little house became loud and chaotic, filled with laughter and tears and the constant noise of children playing. Kieran proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind, always ready to play or tell stories or comfort a crying child. He taught Thomas to ride when the boy turned 5, and he carried Sarah on his shoulders when they went for walks, and he rocked David to sleep every night, singing old songs he remembered from his own childhood. Laura watched her family grow with a full heart, teaching her own children their letters and numbers, baking bread in her kitchen, sewing clothes by lamplight. It was not the life she had imagined for herself when she was younger, not the adventure and travel she had once dreamed of, but it was better. It was real and solid and filled with love. The years passed, bringing changes to Val Verde and to their family. Sheriff Holloway retired and Kieran was offered the position, but he turned it down, content with his work as a deputy. A new teacher came to take over some of Laura's classes when the school grew too large for one person to handle. Thomas started school, then Sarah, then David. The children grew taller, learned to read, made friends, got into mischief. Through it all, Laura and Kieran's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, their difficult moments, but they always worked through them together. They still took walks in the evenings when the weather was nice, still sat on the porch at sunset, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. After 10 years of marriage, Kieran could still make Laura's heart race with a look, and Laura could still make Kieran smile with a word. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran took Laura back to the place where they had first met, that clearing in the woods where he had wrapped his shirt around her shoulders and promised to keep her safe. They stood there in the dappled sunlight, older now, worn by work and parenthood but happy, and Kieran took her hands in his. "Do you remember that night?" he asked. "I remember everything," Laura said. "I remember how afraid I was and how you made me feel safe. I remember thinking that I never wanted you to leave. I remember thinking that you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Kieran said. "Even with your dress torn and your hair wild, I thought you were beautiful. And I remember knowing, even then, that you were going to change my life." "Did I?" Laura asked with a smile. "You gave me a life," Kieran said seriously. "Before you, I was just drifting, going nowhere, belonging to nothing. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." Laura felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You gave me those things too," she said. "Before you, I thought I had to be alone to be safe. You taught me that love is worth the risk." They kissed there in the clearing, a kiss that held 10 years of love and laughter and shared moments. And then they walked back through the woods hand in hand, back to the town where their children were waiting, back to the life they had built together. The years continued to unfold, bringing new joys and new challenges. Thomas grew into a serious young man who wanted to study law, and they sent him to school in San Antonio with pride and a little sadness. Sarah proved to have a gift for music, and they saved up to buy her a piano, which she played beautifully. David was the wild one, always climbing trees and chasing animals, but he had a good heart and made them laugh every day. Laura went back to teaching when the children were older, and she found that she loved it just as much as she always had. Kieran continued his work as a deputy, keeping the peace in Val Verde, respected by everyone in town. They were not rich, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. When Laura turned 45, she stood in her kitchen one morning and looked around at her life. Thomas was home visiting from San Antonio, where he was now working as a lawyer. Sarah was engaged to a young banker from Val Verde, planning a wedding for the following spring. David was 17 and talking about joining the Texas Rangers. Her house was full of life and noise and love. Kieran came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Laura said, leaning back against him. "About how one terrifying night in the woods led to all of this." "Not so terrifying," Kieran said. "I was there, remember?" Laura laughed. "It was terrifying," she said, "but you made it better. You have always made everything better." "That goes both ways," Kieran said. He turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "I love you, Laura Malloy. I have loved you for 23 years, and I will love you for however many more years we are given." "I love you too," Laura said. "Always." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other the way they had held each other countless times before, and Laura thought about the strange, wonderful path her life had taken. She thought about the scared young woman who had run through the woods, about the lonely cowboy who had wrapped his shirt around her shoulders, about the love that had grown between them, unexpected and precious and enduring. Sarah's wedding the following spring was a beautiful affair, held in the church with the whole town in attendance. Laura cried happy tears as she watched her daughter exchange vows, and Kieran held her hand, understanding without words what she was feeling. Another chapter closing, another one beginning. David did join the Rangers when he turned 18, and they worried about him constantly. But he thrived in the work and came home often with stories of his adventures. Thomas married a sweet-faced girl from San Antonio and brought her to meet them, and Laura loved her immediately. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren now, babies that Laura rocked and sang to just as she had rocked and sung to her own children. Kieran retired from his deputy work when he turned 58, his body finally protesting the long days and physical demands. He took up carpentry instead, making furniture for their growing family, beautiful pieces that would last for generations. Laura retired from teaching at 60, passing the schoolhouse on to a new generation of teachers, but she still tutored children in the afternoons, unable to fully give up the work she loved. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. They still took walks when the weather was good, though shorter ones now. They still sat on their porch at sunset, watching the world go by. They still held hands, still kissed goodnight, still told each other, "I love you," every single day. On a warm evening in June, when Laura was 68 and Kieran was 70, they sat on their porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their children and grandchildren had just left after a Sunday dinner, and the house was quiet again, filled with the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. "You ever think about that night in the woods?" Laura asked, her hand in Kieran's. "I think about it often," Kieran said. "It was the luckiest night of my life." "Mine too," Laura said, "even though I was terrified." "You were brave," Kieran said. "You have always been brave." "Only because you taught me how to be," Laura said. She looked at him, at his weathered face, at the gray in his hair, at the lines around his eyes, and she saw the same man who had given her his shirt all those years ago, the same kind eyes, the same gentle strength. "Thank you, Kieran." "For what?" he asked. "For staying," Laura said simply. "For choosing me, for building this life with me." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Kieran said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, Laura Malloy. And loving you has been mine," Laura said. They sat there as the sun set, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as the warm breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood tree in their yard. They sat there together, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and had chosen to build something beautiful together, two souls who had been lost and alone and who had found home in each other's arms. The story that had begun with fear and flight, with a torn dress and a borrowed shirt, had become a story of love and family, of ordinary days made extraordinary by the presence of the right person, of two lives intertwined so completely that they could no longer imagine being separate. It was a story that would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passed down through the generations, A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And as Laura and Kieran sat there on their porch, their hands clasped together, they knew that every moment of their journey had been worth it. Every struggle and joy and ordinary Tuesday afternoon. They had built a life together from nothing, from a chance meeting in the woods, and it was a good life, a happy life, a life filled with love. The years would continue to pass, bringing more changes, more joys, more sorrows. There would be more grandchildren born, more family gatherings, more quiet evenings on the porch. There would be the inevitable losses that come with age, the friends who passed away, the health scares, the aches and pains. But through it all, Laura and Kieran would have each other, would face everything together the way they always had. When Kieran passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, Laura held his hand and whispered that she loved him, that she would always love him, that he had been the greatest gift of her life. And though her heart broke with grief, she also felt gratitude for the 50 years they had been given, for every moment they had shared. She lived 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about their father and grandfather, keeping his memory alive. And when it was her time to go, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, and her last words were his name. They were buried side by side in the Val Verde cemetery, under a cottonwood tree much like the one in their yard. Their headstone read, Kieran and Laura Malloy, beloved parents and grandparents, together forever. And the story of how they met, of the cowboy who wrapped his shirt around the frightened schoolteacher's shoulders, became part of the town's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But to those who had known them, who had seen them walk hand in hand through the streets of Val Verde for 50 years, who had witnessed the quiet, steady love between them, it was not a legend. It was simply the truth. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other every day, who had built a life together that lasted long after they were gone. Their children carried their legacy forward, teaching their own children about love and commitment and the importance of choosing someone and staying, even when things were hard. Their grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the night in the woods, about the torn dress and the borrowed shirt, about how sometimes love comes when you least expect it, how sometimes a single moment can change everything. And in Val Verde, Texas, the little white schoolhouse still stood, and the cottage where Laura and Kieran had lived still housed a family, and the clearing in the woods where they first met became a place where young couples would go to pledge their love, believing it was blessed by the memory of 2 people who had found forever in each other's arms. The story was complete, the circle closed, every thread resolved. Laura and Kieran Malloy had lived and loved and built something beautiful together. And their story, which began with fear and danger and a cowboy's kindness, ended with peace and fulfillment and the knowledge that they had been truly, deeply, completely loved. It was a good ending, a happy ending, an ending that was really just another beginning as their love lived on in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. The sun set over Val Verde that evening as it had every evening for generations, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the echo of an old love story lingered, a reminder that sometimes the best adventures begin with a single act of kindness, a borrowed shirt, and 2 people brave enough to take a chance on each other.